One of my favorite books of all time, and this is actually a book series, is called Lord of the Rings. How many of you all have maybe read the Lord of the Rings series before? It's written by J.R. Tolkien, entitled The Return of the King is the third in the Trinity. Tolkien shares with us as readers a beautiful conclusion to what many consider one of the greatest epics ever written. This ending is filled with emotion and imagery as protagonist Frodo Baggins sails to a distant horizon, and the author concludes the adventure for their remaining hobbits. He writes these words: "At last the three companions turned away, and never again looking back, they rode slowly homewards. And they spoke no word to one another until they came back to the Shire. But each had great comfort in his friends on the long gray road. At last they rode over the downs and took the east road, and then Merry and Pippin rode on to Buckland, and already they were singing again as they went. But Sam turned to Bywater, and so he came back up the hill as day was ending once more. And he went on, and there was yellow light and fire within, and the evening meal was ready, and he was expected. And Rose drew him in and set him in his chair and put little Eleanor upon his lap. He drew a deep breath. 'Well, I'm back,' he said." The end. What a beautiful ending to an amazing adventure telling the tales of Middle-earth. Good defeats evil. Lives are saved. The Shire is restored. It's only fantasy, though, isn't it? If only real life were as clear and as obvious. And the reality is that most of our lives are more akin to the ending of the Sopranos television series, as Journey's "Don't Stop Believin'" is playing in the background. The mobster Tony Soprano looks up, and the screen abruptly cuts to black. Real life is sometimes ambiguous, uncertain, and harsh in this way. We as humans for millennia have been doing everything in our power to try and eliminate such stress from our daily existence. We learned to plant crops and raise livestock instead of having to go hunting and gathering. We created economies with currency, professions, and retirement accounts. We drive cars that drive themselves, friends. We have phones that tell us when to wake up, to eat, to stand, to sit, and to go to bed. And even when the world continues to feel just a bit too unpredictable still, well, we have created ways to have just about anything delivered to our doors so that we don't have to take a step outside into the harsh chaos that is daily living. And dare I say, we've done this with our lives of faith as well. Again, as humans are prone to do. We as Christians have created all sorts of official statements and doctrines on what exactly we must believe. We have created denominations and churches, and when we disagree again, we create more denominations and more churches. Want to be a Christian? No problem. We have a step-by-step guide found in multitudes of books and online websites and social media outlets, programs for just about any affinity one's heart may desire. And don't forget, as good Presbyterians, we have a committee waiting for you. We do all of this, again, as humans, as Christians, in an attempt to help eliminate the uncertainty that both life and faith present. Again, we desire for things to be in order, to make sense. But is this what following Jesus as a disciple is all about? Is this what the Easter story is all about? So let's get into our author's Mark's gospel story once again as we hear this familiar and maybe predictable Easter story told as we have heard it over the years. But today I also invite us to reflect on the unsettling nature of such a story as told in today's world. And so again, we're reading from the 16th chapter from the Gospel of Mark. As our Bible study this previous week there's actually a bit of an academic controversy taking place when discussing the ending of Mark's Gospel. Some of the earliest manuscripts of Mark have the Gospel ending at verse 8 with how we read it for us here today. And then other later manuscripts actually include an additional statement to conclude verse 8, beginning with giving it some maybe closure to the story, and even still others yet add an entire closing section. We read those now as verses 9 through 20, although most scholars agree that this section would more likely than not have been Mark's own hand. And all this being said, I think it's a bit poetic, don't you think, for us to be having such a controversial ending to such a gospel story. After all, isn't that what the Easter story is in itself? Controversial. Mark begins chapter 16 by reintroducing three women in this story, Mary, and Salome. These women were with Jesus throughout the previous experiences in the gospel. They were followers, they were disciples of Jesus. And it's with such an Easter story that these women are also witnesses. The first witnesses, in fact. They desired to dress the body of Jesus, who had hung from the cross just days previous, to give their teacher a respectful death. And from the earliest moments of the first day of the week, just as the sun had risen in the east, these women noticed something out of the ordinary. And so Mary and Salome discovered that the stone that had blocked the entrance to the tomb in which the body of Jesus had lain was actually rolled back. Mark alludes to us as the readers that there is more in play than simply a strong individual who rolled such a stone back. And on top of this, when the women enter the tomb, they find the body missing. Mark describes the scene here in verse 5. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side. And the women were understandably alarmed. This is no ordinary day. The works of the stone being rolled away, the missing body of Jesus, this angelic figure waiting for them, well, this is all too much. And then the angel shares the good news for us as readers this morning. Do not be alarmed, he says. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. And the angel then gives instructions to go back to Peter and those other disciples. They will meet resurrected Jesus again later on, as Jesus has told them. And then, well, Mark leaves us with a bit of a cliffhanger here to end this gospel. Verse 8 reads, So the women went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Wait a minute. What? What do you mean? This is the ending of the story? They left running away in terror and amazement? What about the instructions the angel had given them? What happened to Peter and those other disciples? Where is Jesus after all? Where is the closure? We as readers, as humans, so often desire closure in our stories, as we do in our lives as well. We want to know things end well. We want to be assured that order has been restored, that we understand the moral of the story, that the good guy wins, that there is a clear and happy ending. But Mark doesn't end his story in that way. Instead, Mark's absence of closure, in a way, invites us, as the reader, to continue the story. And isn't this what transformation in discipleship, all that we've been talking about these previous weeks of Lent, isn't this what it looks like in our lives of faith as well? We as humans, as we so often desire for easy black and white answers in this world, what if the whole moral of the story for following Jesus is that the ending is just the beginning? What if the takeaway for us today is that true discipleship begins with terror and amazement in the presence of the holy? It seems that the controversy of Mark's ending, or lack thereof, is perhaps the most perfect of endings then. Because living in faith is not about tying a nice bow on life so that we can make sense of this world, but rather about the unsettling faith of being sent out into the world with good news of the risen Christ, but with nothing to show except an empty tomb. Friends, the good news today is that our experience of terror and amazement when encountering the holy in this world is just the beginning of faith and discipleship. The gospel story does not tidily end, but rather begins anew, now with us as the storytellers, now with us as the witnesses. Such news is terrifying for us as humans, and it's also amazing if we allow it. The cross and the empty tomb then become not a sign of execution and death, but rather signs of rebirth and salvation. This is what we celebrate today. We worship a God whose story is not over. We are beloved creations partaking in a story that is only now beginning. We follow Jesus, who is not dead but lives eternal. We as followers of Jesus are sent off with good news that is both alarming to the earthly empires of this world and also truly liberating to us as citizens of God's kingdom. We are led by the Spirit, the living, breathing, moving Spirit of God, who baptizes us with fire, who leads us through the wilderness, who transforms our minds, our hearts, and our very lives. For this, we give all thanks and praise. Alleluia. Amen.